two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a cart, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her SNAP card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly, you consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. Is that what you consider talking? Vince paused. Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases. Roderick inhaled deeply. Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue? Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong. The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary. He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary. Weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. Got enough for the machine? He inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. Oh, I was just checking if I'd change. She explained, adding, I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently. Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. Let me assist, he offered. She paused. I didn't request, she began, but he gently interrupted. You didn't. I'm offering, she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. What's your name? She asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya. Tanya Wells. A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. You got kids? Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital. Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. So you're the safe place for somebody? Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. Trying to be, he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. You don't speak as if you're frightened, she stated. I wasn't, Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. I've experienced conflict before, he stated. It hasn't altered much. Words did today. Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. I anticipated an attempt. They will not, Roderick stated calmly. Not tonight. A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. I observe what you did, she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. I regret not saying anything, she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. You will next time. The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. Come on, dear. He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot. The little girl, now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. Safe place for somebody, he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken, instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and two grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discreet actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her, this small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled, a genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment, and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. Then he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison. Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshawn had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshawn? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. "With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence." Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. "Let's take a look." The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. "I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced," she stated, "only that it should be enforced fairly." There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. "And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly?" Naomi replied concisely. "It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective." He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. "I'll accept her." The judge cleared his throat. "We'll admit the video for review." "Continue." Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop." That specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expression softened. The clerk paused her pen-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing a comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. "The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment." Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge. "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good." He chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it?" "I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. Let's return to the matter at hand. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. "Miss Ellison," he stated as she resumed her testimony, "let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation?" Naomi responded promptly. "Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy." The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. "I notice you're quite well informed," he remarked. "Yes, Your Honor." He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yick v., she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, speaking almost calmly now, "what exactly do you want from this court?" Naomi took a breath. "I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny." She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. "May I review your notes?" Naomi was taken aback. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them." The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. "This is remarkable," he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, "However, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield." Naomi did not avert her gaze. "Then perhaps the structure requires pressure." The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment." But the woman did not flinch. "I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings." While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. "You all right?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. Why would she say that? Naomi asked, almost to herself. Why would someone like her defend me? Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. "Miss Ellison," she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. "Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood? Particularly without the qualifications. That's not something that can be fabricated." Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. "I'm not attempting to compliment you," she said. "I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential." Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." Judith smiled, then rose. "Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive." Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. "Yo, who are you right now?" She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. "I'm just me." However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. "They're ready." Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieved her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. "Proceed." She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. "My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others." A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, "We've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them." Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. "You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all." Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. "Not yet. I may not hold a degree," Naomi stated, "but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to." Her voice faltered just a little at that final word. Not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager. Still human. Still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic." He paused. "You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic." Another pause. "I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard." A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance he tapped the gavel once. Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned. Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her aged school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent." Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this? Law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a look, a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate. Two teenagers walked into a car dealership with nothing but excitement and respect. Minutes later, they were asked to leave due to appearing suspicious. The following day, their billionaire father arrived, not to express anger, but to ensure the incident was publicly acknowledged. The sun was heavy over Tempe that afternoon, one of those dry, slow-moving Arizona days where the heat hums through the concrete. After track practice, Malik Townsend walked alongside his sister Ayanna through the parking lot of Madison Auto Gallery, his gray t-shirt damp against his back. They weren't intending to cause any disturbance. Malik, in fact, had been discussing this visit all week. "I'm not saying I'm getting a car today," he said, adjusting the strap of his gym bag. "But I want to see what they have. Maybe something used, you know?" Ayanna laughed, tossing her braids over her shoulder just to gauge expectations before her birthday. "You really think Dad is going to let you drive yourself to school in a two-door coupe?" "Come on," he smiled, but his steps didn't slow. "Let me dream." The dealership lot was still. Sleek silver sedans were arranged under sun-faded flags. The glass doors reflected the heat, and the two entered as any pair of kids with questions and wide eyes. The air conditioning inside was sharp, a contrast to the warmth outside. A middle-aged man wearing a pale blue dress shirt looked up from behind a counter. His gaze first fell on Malik, then moved to Ayanna. They were neatly dressed, Malik in athletic gear, Ayanna in a simple dress and sneakers. Their appearance was unassuming, quiet. Nevertheless, the man rose quickly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice concise. Malik, always courteous, approached. "Yeah, just checking out some cars. Maybe looking for something used?" "My birthday is next month, and do you have an appointment?" A man interrupted, already walking toward them. Malik hesitated. "No, we do not allow unsupervised minors in the showroom." He cut in, glancing quickly at a coworker across the room. "Company policy." Ayanna's face shifted. "We're not touching anything." "Still, this is not a hangout spot." His tone had turned colder now. "You can look at the website if you're interested." The silence that followed was thick. Malik started to speak, then stopped. Ayanna's fingers gripped the bag strap with force. "We'll leave," Malik said softly. They departed as such. There was no shouting, no resistance. Only the measured walk back along the sidewalk, with Ayanna holding her breath throughout. She remained silent until they were settled in the back of the Uber before she spoke. "That man regarded us as if we were insignificant." Malik acknowledged with a single, almost imperceptible nod. His jaw tightened. He touched his phone screen, verifying the ride time, and then gazed out the window. Ayanna observed her brother's reflection in the glass. She noticed how withdrawn he had become. He wasn't typically a boisterous person, but this felt different. It wasn't simply quietness, it was control. She remembered seeing that expression on their dad's face once before. "You're not going to tell Dad, are you?" He hesitated before replying. "Malik? I don't know," he finally said. "I don't even know what to call it." It's not like the man had said anything outlandish. He simply didn't want us present. Ayanna reclined. "It seemed unbelievable to me." Neither of them spoke for the remainder of the journey. It wasn't necessary. They were both aware of what had transpired. However, the man at the dealership was completely unaware of who he had just dismissed, and by the following morning, he would discover it. The Uber proceeded through the hills of Paradise Valley, where the houses grew larger, quieter, and more dispersed as they ascended. Ayanna sat with her arms crossed inside the black SUV, the tinted windows shielding her simmering frustration. Malik remained silent, holding his phone with the screen dark. His thoughts drifted away. Their home appeared, a contemporary white and stone house situated behind a private gate. It wasn't ostentatious, but possessed an expensive quality typical of established wealth or astute financial acumen. Their father, Charles Townsend, had constructed his technology company from the ground up, initially offering hardware repairs in Flagstaff before achieving success with a data security startup. Currently, his name appeared in Forbes articles and at Silicon Valley panel discussions. However, locally, he was simply known as Charles. The children entered through the side entrance and placed their belongings on the bench close to the kitchen. The house carried a subtle scent of cedar and fresh linen. Their housekeeper, Mrs. K, looked up from the dining table while folding towels. "Hey everyone, is everything all right?" Ayana mumbled in response. Malik did not answer. Their father's voice came from down the hall. "Malik?" Malik appeared in the hallway moments later, still wearing his navy polo, barefoot, and holding tablet. "You're back early," he said, giving a shrug. Charles noticed a slump in his son's shoulders immediately and the way he avoided eye contact. He glanced at Ayana. Her expression conveyed more than she likely intended. What occurred? Malik remained silent. Charles placed the tablet down and crossed his arms. "Malik," Ayana exhaled. "A man at the dealership stated we were not permitted inside." Charles furrowed his brow. "Which dealership?" "Madison Auto Gallery, located off University Drive." "What precisely did he say?" Malik massaged the back of his neck. "He indicated we weren't allowed to browse. He mentioned they don't allow individuals under the age of 18 without a parent present and accused us of loitering." Charles remained motionless for a considerable time. His eyes narrowed a little, not in anger, but with concentration. That measured, careful assessment that indicated he was anticipating 2 or 3 moves ahead. "What did you do?" "We left," Malik stated. "We didn't want to create a disturbance." That was impactful. Charles inhaled deeply, moved into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. He offered it to Malik before speaking again. "You acted correctly. Do you understand?" Malik affirmed once. Then, his father settled onto a counter stool and looked squarely at him. "Please understand this. You are not inferior to anyone. I'm not concerned if you arrive in athletic wear or formal attire. Maintain your composure. And if someone perceives you as a cause for concern, that is their responsibility, not yours." Ayana rested against the fridge, observing. Charles continued, his voice calm and measured. "However, you also need to be aware of this. Quietude does not invariably signify strength. Occasionally, allowing minor offenses to occur enables their repetition, first with one individual and then with another." Malik's throat tightened. "What's the plan?" Charles didn't respond immediately. He surveyed them both, then rose and retrieved his phone. "I'm going to speak with someone," Ayana said, surprised. "With whom?" Charles replied, departing the room. The subsequent hours until tomorrow morning unfolded with an unusual calm. There were no shouts, no hurried phone calls. Charles prepared dinner as always, grilled salmon, asparagus, and rice. They ate together as a family. A change was palpable. It wasn't animosity, it was determination. That night, Malik lay awake, gazing at the ceiling for a considerable time before finally falling asleep. He didn't fully understand what his dad intended with the discussion, but he sensed it would be more impactful than any outburst. Meanwhile, at the dealership, the manager remained unaware that trouble was brewing. Madison Auto Gallery commenced business at 9 a.m. promptly. As early as 8:45, employees began arriving, their keys jingling, coffee cups in hand, and sunglasses still on. The typical Monday routine. Derek Holton, the assistant sales manager, rested against the front desk, sipping his iced Americano and checking his phone. He no longer recognized many of the names of his inbox. Employee turnover was significant. The position offered good compensation for those who could sell, and he was a skilled salesperson. By 9:03, there was one customer in the parking lot. A navy blue Rolls-Royce Phantom shimmered in the Arizona sun. It did not enter a standard parking spot. It did not wait in the rear. It moved smoothly to the front doors and stopped. Initially, no one exited the vehicle. Derek looked at the receptionist, then walked around the desk. "Are you expecting someone?" he inquired. She replied, her gaze fixed on the car, no. Then, the door opened. A tall man emerged, wearing a dark blazer, sharply tailored slacks, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. He moved deliberately, with composure. Without preamble, He pushed the glass door open and paused at the entrance. "Good morning," he stated, his voice smooth yet resolute. "I'm seeking a manager." Derek hesitated. "I'm the assistant manager. How may I assist you?" The man fixed him with a direct gaze. "You're not the person I require." At that moment, Kyle Linson, the general manager, emerged from the adjacent office. He was tall, red-faced, and perpetually seemed stressed. "Morning," he said quickly. "I'm Kyle. What can I do for you?" The man retrieved a card from his jacket pocket and offered it. Kyle read the name deliberately. Charles Townsend, founder and chairman. TNS Global. He looked up, a flush rising on his face. Wow, sir. I wasn't expecting," he stammered. "I imagine you weren't either," Charles replied, stepping further inside. "I won't take much of your time." Kyle indicated his office, his eyes briefly darting towards Derek. We could talk in here." But Charles remained still. "No need for privacy. This is a public place." "I'll speak briefly." Kyle nodded, appearing uncomfortable. "Naturally. Please proceed." Charles surveyed the showroom. "Yesterday, 2 children entered. One was my son, the other my daughter." Kyle blinked. His throat moved. "I understand. They were informed they couldn't browse, that they should depart, that this establishment wasn't suitable for them." "Sir, we have—" Charles raised a hand. "I'm not here to debate. I'm not seeking a reimbursement. I experienced no loss yesterday. But you did. You missed an opportunity to act justly towards 2 young people, individuals raised to show respect for others, regardless of how they are treated in return." Several other employees had begun to move nearer, feigning to organize documents or wipe down surfaces. Charles continued, "My children are not disruptive. They are thoughtful, intelligent, raised with care, and they don't require your approval. However, they deserve to be regarded as people, not as dangers." Derek looked down at his shoes. The receptionist had ceased typing. Kyle cleared his throat. "Mr. Townsend, if I may, I'm not requesting an apology," Charles stated. "Apologies are simple. The crucial aspect is what one believes when no one is observing. The choices one makes when they presume no one will question them." He paused, allowing the silence to linger. "Because next time it won't be my children. It could be someone who lacks a father with connections to the media. They will leave this place with a memory that will likely remain unspoken, yet it will stay with them for the remainder of their lives." Then he turned to depart. But just before opening the door, he added, without looking back, "You can sell luxury without being small. I hope you understand how." Outside, a small gathering had formed. 2 individuals were recording on their phones, one local reporter acting on a tip, and a woman holding a microphone. Charles had not alerted them. The news had simply spread. A change permeated the air, not in temperature, but in feeling. Charles descended onto the dealership pavement with calm, measured steps. His expression remained steady despite the small group gathering. 2 college students from a local school stood apart, their phones out, quietly speaking to one another. A reporter from KXME5 News was already in the process of speaking, murmuring in her microphone, uncertain if she was broadcasting live. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not seek out a podium. He paused close to the entrance, straightened his jacket, and began to speak. "I hadn't intended to offer any words today. However, I understand the nature of things. If I remain silent now, another will attempt to voice my thoughts." He raised his gaze, observing the limited faces present. "My son, Malik, and my daughter, Ayana, arrived here yesterday afternoon. They were quiet. They didn't disturb anything. They came here to observe. Like any other young person with a flicker of anticipation and a hope in their heart, his voice remained steady. It wasn't booming, it was gentle. So gentle, it compelled people to draw closer. Yet they were asked to depart. Not for violating a regulation, not for handling something inappropriately, but because someone determined they didn't fit, that they presented an issue before they uttered a single word. The college student clutching the phone released a quiet, trembling sigh. Charles continued, "I've worked my whole life to build something that would last. And I've taught my children that what you build doesn't just sit in your bank account. It lives in how you treat people, in the everyday decisions, the ones you make when nobody's watching. He paused again, not for drama, but because the next words meant something. Yesterday, someone looked at my children and didn't see who they were. They saw who they assumed they were, and they dismissed them. It's possible to be disrespectful without raising your voice. Sometimes it's about making someone feel diminished in a place they were eager to enter. Behind the glass doors, Kyle stood watching, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Charles glanced over his shoulder briefly, then returned his attention to the people ahead of him. I'm not suggesting anyone should boycott this establishment. I don't endorse that approach. I'm no longer even feeling anger. I am simply weary of observing this recurring behavior. It's deeply troubling to see young people treated as if they've committed crimes before any wrongdoing has occurred. Such experiences leave a lasting impact. Silence allows these situations to persist. Several more people paused on the sidewalk. A delivery person across the street adjusted their sunglasses to observe more closely. I came today because my children should not have been subjected to that kind of treatment, and because I want them to understand that when something is wrong, it shouldn't be ignored. You confront it with clarity, with dignity, and without allowing it to change who you are. He retreated towards a Rolls-Royce, his hand resting on the door handle. One more point. My kids left yesterday, holding their heads high. That speaks volumes about their character and reveals nothing about the person who attempted to diminish them. He entered the car and remained silent. The onlookers did not offer applause. There was no clapping. A stunned silence filled the space as everyone absorbed the information, the visuals, and the implications. Inside the dealership, Derek lowered himself into a chair. The receptionist's eyes were brimming with tears, and she couldn't explain why. Kyle Lenson stayed near the window, his arms held rigidly at his sides. Yet, he understood that it was no longer possible to manage the narrative. By that afternoon, the first video appeared on Twitter, followed by Instagram, and then the news. The story began to develop independently. By lunchtime, the story had moved beyond local coverage. A shaky vertical phone video, initially recorded by college freshman Tori Clements, had already garnered over 2 million views on X. The accompanying caption stated, "This man just entered a dealership that disrespected his kids and addressed the situation with remarkable composure." I'm truly speechless. Viewers weren't simply sharing the video, they were analyzing it, pausing specific moments, magnifying details, and engaging in discussions and debates within comment threads. A woman from Flagstaff shared a story, noting that Charles Townsend repaired her father's laptop in 2001 and refused payment. She described him as having always been exceptional. However, other reactions were less charitable. One anonymous user, whose profile picture featured an eagle, questioned why the children hadn't disclosed their father's identity, suggesting a desire to portray themselves as victims, which led to the situation escalating. The story subsequently appeared on morning talk shows. During a segment titled, "Billionaire Father Calls Out Discrimination at Tempe Car Dealership," Good Morning Phoenix reported that the dealership's Yelp rating plummeted from 4.2 to 2.1 within hours. Numerous one-star reviews appeared quickly. Customers cited concerns like rude and dismissive staff, feeling that a teenage son was treated like a criminal and vows to never return. Some reviewers claimed that unless one is wearing a suit and tie, they would be asked to leave before speaking. Naturally, the negative response wasn't solely from unfamiliar reviewers. Community organizations also started focusing attention on the situation, advocating for discussions regarding young people, societal views, and implicit prejudice. Amidst this, the dealership issued a response. This was a brief, 2-paragraph apology published on their website and Instagram page, stating, "We regret the recent experience that took place at our showroom and are actively reviewing our policies. We strive to provide a welcoming environment to all guests and take these matters seriously." The reactions online spoke volumes. The regret appears to stem from exposure rather than genuine remorse. Instead of policy review, perhaps employee evaluation is needed. This apology lacks sincerity, resembling a fine instead of an expression of concern. Privately, Kyle Lenson was working to manage the situation. He had already contacted 2 PR consultants, both of whom advised him to minimize communication, avoid public attention, and refrain from attempts at damage control. However, online sentiment disregarded PR strategies. The public demanded openness, accountability, and concrete steps. While Malik and Ayanna remained at home, their phones buzzed incessantly with messages, some from friends and others from unknown numbers. Ayanna showed her brother a message that elicited laughter, even amidst the circumstances. "Girl, is that your dad on the news? Tell him to run for office or something. I'm dead." However, more difficult messages soon followed. "Why didn't y'all just walk away?" One read, "Ain't nobody owes you a car." Another stated, "Not everything is about race." A final message simply asked, "He probably thought you were skipping school. So what? Rich people want sympathy now?" Malik glanced at his screen, his jaw clenched. Ayanna touched his shoulder. "Don't read that," he mumbled, not looking up. He continued scrolling. Their father entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Put the phone down," Charles said. "Just for now." Malik paused, then placed his phone face down on the table. Ayanna did the same. Charles sat opposite them, leaning forward a little. Ayanna frowned. "You two didn't ask for this, but sometimes life decides your story's bigger than just you." "But we didn't even do anything," she added. "We just walked in." "I know," he replied. "That's what makes this so real. You did everything right. And still, someone saw you wrong." Malik stared at the tabletop. "Is it always going to be like that?" Charles paused, letting the question linger. "No," he said, "but you'll face it again. And when you do, you decide who you want to be in that moment." Reporters continued to gather outside. Inside, a feeling deeper than anger began to develop: awareness. And awareness is a persistent force. As the sun descended behind Camelback Mountain, it stretched shadows across the towns and backyard. It had been 2 days since Charles spoke at the dealership, 2 extended, peaceful days filled with news coverage, messages, and public commentary. Yet, shielded by the hedges, a sense of calm prevailed. Charles stood by the grill, methodically flipping salmon fillets. Malik was seated at the patio table, his elbows on his knees, gazing out across the lawn. Ayanna was leaning against the railing, her face hidden within her hoodie. There were no cameras, no inquiries, just family. "You know," Charles began, "without looking up, when I was 16, I saved for 2 years to purchase my first car, a 1994 Corolla. It was faded red and had manual windows." Ayanna looked at him. "You mentioned it didn't have AC, correct?" Charles chuckled. "None at all. A Phoenix summer nearly cooked me. But I cherished that car. I received that treatment not because of kindness, but because I deserved it." Malik finally glanced in my direction. "Have you ever experienced something like that? Like we did?" Charles acknowledged with a single nod. "More times than I can recall. Being followed when entering stores. Being ridiculed when applying for bank loans. I was once refused service at a diner in Tucson. I was there with my code books in my lap, and I simply departed without a confrontation. But why didn't I respond?" Malik inquired, mirroring my current reaction. Charles then turned another fillet. "I didn't believe my voice held weight previously. I felt that remaining unnoticed was the sole path to progress." He paused, but I was mistaken. The grill emitted a quiet hiss. "The truth is, son, enduring enough disrespect can lead you to forget what it feels like to be acknowledged. And I never desired that for you, nor for your sister." Ayanna took a seat next to her brother. "You certainly ensured we were noticed." Charles now addressed them both. "Being noticed isn't sufficient. One must be prepared for the consequences. The acclaim, the disapproval, the individuals who will support you for taking a stand, and those who will oppose it." Malik glanced at his hands. "I never intended for it to become an issue. I simply wished to observe a car." "I understand," Charles stated. "That's what makes it significant. You weren't seeking attention. You were simply living your life. And someone objected to the appearance of that." They paused briefly. "I am proud of you," Charles added. "Both of you." Ayanna shrugged. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't attempt to demonstrate anything. You simply remained genuine," she said. "It didn't seem courageous." "It shouldn't," he responded. "Courage is often understated. It's about not compromising your integrity in a world that occasionally lacks it." A quiet stillness enveloped the yard. Then Ayanna smiled. "So, Are we still searching for a car or what? Charles grinned. I anticipated you would inquire. Malik straightened up. Are you serious? Charles threw a set of keys onto the table. They fell near Malik's hand with a quiet clink. Check the garage tomorrow, he said. But it's not about the car. It's about who you become while driving it. That matters more than anything with an engine. Ayana leaned into her brother, teasing. You better not crash it on the first day. Please, Malik shot back. I'm driving like it's made of glass. Charles laughed, and for the first time in days, the weight of the moment began to ease. Some stories conclude with anger, others with quietness. But this one concludes with a lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to respond is to remain upright, peaceful, truthful, and acknowledged. If this story evoked a feeling in you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge, connect, and remind us who we truly are.